Probably most of you know, just because word of mouth gets around, that on the weekend that our group came back from the Carolina Christian Youth Conference, Dustin and Lexi got back to find out that someone had broke into their house while they were gone and had gone through and rummaged through everything and stole some things. And, that just brings a strange feeling when anybody's done anything like that. Last week, Janice always parks her car in the garage, and I always park outside. Well, she drove my car on that Friday night and come back not used to locking the car. She left my car unlocked. And when I went out on Saturday morning, the glove compartment was open, the console was open, the ashtray laying in the floor, and so somebody had come and went through our car while I was there, and the only thing they took, they left other valuables in the car, but just took the change that was in the ashtray. It wasn't a great loss, but I'll put it this way: Janice will not be having Christmas this year. I've been very, very fortunate in my lifetime that never had my car vandalized, house broken into. Some of you have had both of those things done, and it does just cause a strange feeling to come over you. A couple of nights after that, Janice was saying, it just makes me feel weird to know that somebody was right outside our house going through our stuff. And it does. It makes you think that way. But even if you've had some of those things happen to you, I doubt very seriously any of you have had this happen to you. That you look out your window and see a group of people outside your house and have spray paint, and they paint on the side of your house this symbol. Now, before you think, well, I'd go out there and show them a thing or two, they have more than spray paint. They have guns, and you do not. So you nor I would go out and tell them anything there. These symbols first appeared when ISIS, or the Islamic State, took over the second largest city in Iraq, Mosul. They began painting or marking on the houses of Christians this letter. This is the Arabic letter for N, and it stood for, to identify him as the Nazarene, Jesus, or the Nazarenes. And then the Christians were given several opportunities after they were marked this way. You can pay a heavy fine and still stay in your house. You can publicly denounce Jesus Christ and accept and pledge allegiance to Allah. You can flee for your life right now and leave everything you have, or you can stay and die. And that was the choices they had. But these types of persecutions aren't isolated. Ever since the Islamic State, or ISIS, brutally murdered 21 Christians in January, Egyptian Christians have increased in threats, kidnappings, and murders. And we're finding out that ISIS is going around and offering rewards to anybody that will identify their neighbors, which ones are Christians. In Laos, recently, 5 Christian leaders were charged with medical malpractice because they prayed for a woman and she died. They're ordered to serve 9 months in prison and pay a heavy fine for causing her death. In Niger, 45 churches and homes were looted and burned as a result of the cartoon depiction of Allah in the French paper, Charlie Hebdo. Some of the Christians showed right back up at their burned churches the very next Sunday. This past Sunday, the very Sunday that we met together here and worshiped together, on March 15th in East Lahore, Pakistan, there were 2 suicide bombings in churches, killing 17 people and wounding 78 others. Last year, it is estimated by Voice of the Martyrs that 160,000 Christians died for being a Christian. To let that sink into what a number that is, we average about 425 people on a Sunday morning. we would have to fill our church up every Sunday for 7.5 years to replace those Christians who died last year. 7.5 years. What do we do when we read of this, when you hear this and you see it on the news and you see these pictures and you hear these reports? How are we supposed to feel? Is there anything we can do? Or are we supposed to do anything? They're thousands and thousands of miles away. Another world, basically, that they live in. What are we supposed to do? Well, I believe we always go back to the Word of God to find out what we are supposed to do. Today we're going to look at 3 verses. Hebrews chapter 13, if you'll go ahead and turn there, that's where we're going to stay. It'll be on the screen. Get a Bible from the back of the pew in front of you. Whatever you want to read there, but please read along. Hebrews chapter 13, starting with verse 1, says this. Keep on loving each other as brothers. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Now, it's good to get a context here. The writer of Hebrews is writing to a group of Jewish Christians, thus the name Hebrews. And he's concluding his letter where he has rebuked them, he's instructed them, he's encouraged them, he's corrected them. And as sensitive as American Christians are to any type of correction, we would say flat out, he's just fussing at them. But he gets to the last lines of the letter, and he realizes, we always save the most important for last, those parting words. His parting words to these Christians is this. And he realizes this is so important because they get everything else right that he's instructing them to do, but they get this wrong. They don't love each other. He knows it's all for nothing. Look at verse 1 again. Keep on loving each other as brothers. Just as the Christians in Iraq are marked by this letter, let's look at some of the marks of a Christian. And the first one is the mark of loving each other. Now, this is no new teaching, not to you, not to the Hebrew Christians that he was writing it to. It's nothing new, but it is the mark of a Christian. The Greek here says continue in brotherly love. And the Greek word is Philadelphia. And it's where we get our city named Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, which is so ironic because Philadelphia has a terrible reputation for loving each other. Some of the things that have happened, I was reading about at Veterans Stadium where the Philadelphia Eagles play football. There's been incidents where the fans threw snowballs at Santa Claus at a football game, at their own cheerleaders. In the punt, pass, and kick competition for kids, they booed the kids when they didn't do well. I was up there in the Philadelphia area a couple of years ago, and I just made it a point to try to talk to everybody I could to find out if this was true. And I'll tell you, for the most part, I did not find this to be true, which was very encouraging. But how bad would it be for us to be considered to have brotherly love, but that was not our reputation? The picture here is of a family, of brothers and sisters who care for each other and do for each other. I can understand that, and I know you can too. I'm going to be honest with you. If right before I walked up here to preach, I get a text, and I look, and it's from my brother-in-law, which would be a miracle in itself, that he had texted. But if I'd gotten a text and it said, your sister we just had to take her to the hospital. I'm going to be honest with you. I'd finish this sermon, the 111, and it's bye-bye. I'm going to Virginia. If they call and say she needs a kidney, I'd say, hey, I got 2. How great is that? But why? Because she's family. She's my sister. And just like we are family, that my sister and I are family and would do anything for each other, we are family. We are of the same family. We have a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a bond that exists. How do I know that? Because of what the Bible tells me. Hebrews 2, Verse 11 says this: both the one who makes men holy, that's talking about Jesus, and those who are made holy, talking about us, are of the same family. I like it in the way the New Living Translation says we have the same Father. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. We are of the same family. We are together. We are bound together in so many ways, more so than by our biological family. We're bound together by a bond in Jesus Christ, that we have the same Savior. We have the same Father to follow. We may be from different parts of the world. We may never see each other on this side of heaven, but we are family, not just in here, but out there. The Hebrews or Jewish Christians have been doing a good job of this. It tells that in other parts of Hebrew. But he needs to remind them on the very end here, continue to love each other, because we know things can get in the way. Things can change. We can have an argument. People can backslide. We can lose focus. We can lose vision. Things can happen that we forget that we are family and we are to love each other. Now we're starting to build here where I want us to get to. Hebrews 13, verse 2. Look at this. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. And once again, I like the way the New Living Translation substitutes the word hospitality. It says, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers. That's a little more modern word. Entertain, we think about just doing a little song and dance. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you show care for these people. So this is the second mark that we're talking about. The mark of hospitality. The mark of hospitality. Love is not content with words. It uses actions to show the sincerity and the reality of our love. The writings of not the Bible writings, but writings that historians wrote of the day, wrote about how impressed they were with Christians and the way that they showed hospitality to the family of their own brothers and sisters in the faith, but also to strangers. And this was a huge deal to that culture and all the nations of that world, to show hospitality to people, to welcome them in, give them something to eat, give them a place to lay down. And as you read in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see that at times people did entertain or welcome in angels, and they had no idea that it was angels. And this is where we can get off track sometimes. I know we'll read this sometimes and we'll go, well, we better be nice. It might be an angel. And that's missing the whole point. It's not that it might be an angel. The point is, use the opportunity, because you don't know how great the opportunity may turn out to be. I couldn't help but think about this story when I was working on this week about the young man who walked into a hotel, and he said, I need a room. And they said, we're completely booked up. There's no vacancy. He said, you don't have any rooms. And he said, no, we don't have any rooms. You don't have one single room that you can give me for one night. No, we do not, sir. Well, what if your phone rang while I was standing here, and they said, we're calling from Washington, D.C., the White House. The president is coming to this city tonight, and he needs a room. Do you have a room? Are you telling me you wouldn't tell the president he doesn't have a room? He could say, well, I guess we could find him a room. He says, well, I know for a fact he's not coming. I'll take his room. So, but back to hospitality here. Galatians 6:10 says this: therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And this was the practice of followers of Christ, to be hospitable to all people. But when they found out that you were a Christian, then they did everything that they possibly could for you. The importance of this type of hospitality is shown in Jesus' own words. You remember Jesus said, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. And remember, the people said back, I don't remember that. I don't ever remember seeing you that way, Jesus. And if it was you, Jesus, I'd remember it. That's where Jesus straightens them out and says, whatever you did for one of these, you did it for me. From Jesus' own mouth, he tells us how important it is to show hospitality to all, especially to the family of God. My cousin, a young cousin, is in his first preaching ministry, and he's doing a fantastic job. And he called me a year or so ago, I guess it is now, and just to ask, he says, Greg, he says, I've never been faced with this. What's an advice you give me? A woman who had moved away from that area for many, many years had died, and they had brought her back there to bury her. And she literally was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. And he says, there's nothing good to tell. And she abandoned her children. She abandoned her family. There's nothing good to say. And so we talked about some things that he could do. And he called me back and said, hey, everything went good. You know, he said, as good as you could expect it to do. You know, he said it did. But that's not the exciting part. The exciting part was when we talked about 6 months later. And he said, as a direct result of him doing the funeral, the church feeding these people who came in, that people loosely connected with this woman who had not come to church or had never come to church, I think it was like 6 people had made decisions for Christ. Not in the Hells Angels, but the people connected with the family. The Bible says we may entertain angels unaware. I guess sometimes they can be Hell's Angels that we do. But once again, that's not the point. The point is that we use the opportunity. Now, we're building. We're building to where I want us to be. Verse 1 was a general instruction, continue to love one another. That's the foundation. But then he shows how you kind of put some skin on it there. He says, you be hospitable, you welcome people. But let's look at this last verse for the day in Hebrews 13, verse 3. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Once again, I like the New Living Translation. He says, as if you were there yourself. And he talks about in the suffering, he says, as if you felt the pain in your body. So that's the third mark. The mark of remembering. The mark of remembering those in chains and in prison, those mistreated. Remembering is played out in so many ways, both 2,000 years ago when this was taking place and in today. Prisoners then were totally dependent on their family and friends for anything that they needed. If winter came and they needed blankets, the jailers, the government was not going to provide that. A family would come and bring a new coat, a new blanket, a pillow. If they were to eat well and not do better than just keep them from starving to death, it would be that the family and friends would bring food to the prison. And another thing, I thought this was so interesting, it said the historical writers, once again of that day, was writing about one incident where a Christian had been thrown in prison. And it says, they wrote this, it says, no stone was left unturned to secure his legal release. In other words, they went through the channels. They went to their government officials, everything, trying to get this man released. I see that as our responsibility. When we see these injustices going on, we write, we call, we put the pressure wherever we can to try to help. But then it went on to say, but when that failed, they busied themselves caring for him. And it says the widows of the church would cook and carry the food to the prison, and the children would hang around outside the prison talking to the guards, trying to get any word of how well he was doing. And it said the leaders of the church would come and slip the guards a little money or some of the food that they brought so that they could go in and visit with them. Now that's caring for them. They went into the prison themselves. They cooked. They took care of. That's how it worked then. And we should aid organizations that are able to do the work that we can't physically be there to do. And there are organizations who do that. We should put the pressure on our government. And we should do everything we can to help those who are suffering. Remembering aids in us identifying with those Christians. When we remember and put ourselves in their place, it helps us to remember people that we'll never see this side of heaven. Identifying with something or someone is so important. Let me just give this one little illustration that came to my mind. Several Wednesday nights ago, if you were here on Wednesday night, you remember that Carl Beecham was taken to the emergency room. And I wasn't teaching that night, and so I went there. And phone was blowing up, text messages, phone calls. What can we do? Is Carl okay? Do I need to do this? Does somebody need to do this? People were coming there. People were calling. Everybody, because why? We identify with Carl. We identify with Dallas and Leanne and Lisa and all of them because they're part of our family. We identified with them. Now, it went a little further. All of you know, or most of you know, that Carl is a huge Duke fan. When they decided to airlift Carl, and we were standing outside the room, the pilot and the nursing team came and they walked in his room, and I heard Carl say, "Are you a Carolina or a Duke fan?" And the pilot said, "Carolina." And Carl said, "Me too." And I was thinking in my head, yeah, for about 30 minutes. Yeah. He's a smart man. He wanted to identify with who held his life in his hands. But isn't that true? That we want to identify, remembering, thinking of these people, putting ourselves in their place helps us do that. But seriously, the N, the Arabic N that it was written and spray painted on these houses was meant as an insult, as a death sentence. But it has become a rallying cry, uniting Christians around the world. Even governments have gotten behind in seeking to end this kind of brutality. Groups are selling bracelets to remember this. You can buy T-shirts from these organizations that the money goes to help these Christians and to raise awareness. At the end of the service, the very end of the service, I'm going to have a couple of websites up that you can jot down if this is something you want to read more about, and also to order some of these things. And that's what Eric and I and some of us talked about doing Monday, is ordering some of these things. They couldn't get here in time for today. But one last thing. And there's so much more that we could talk about in this setting, but I have to stop at some point, and this is it. Remembering those in prison and those persecuted for your faith emboldens us. It makes us braver. When we look and see what they're suffering, and we say, well, if they can suffer that, then I can put up with a little laughter and ridicule, being a little less popular because of my faith. I'd read this many years ago, but I ran across it again this week. This was found in the papers of a Christian martyr, someone who was killed for their faith. They found these papers in the writings of a Christian in Zimbabwe after he was martyred. It says, he wrote this. He says, "I am a part of the fellowship of the unashamed. The die has been cast. I have stepped over the line. The decision has been made. I'm a disciple of His, and I won't look back. I won't let up. I won't slow down. I won't back away or be still. My past is redeemed. My present makes sense. My future is secure. I'm done and finished with low living, sight walking, small planning, smooth knees, colorless dreams, tamed visions, mundane talking, cheap living, and dwarfed goals. I no longer need preeminence, prosperity, position, promotions, plaudits, or popularity. I don't have to be right or first or tops or recognized or praised or rewarded. I live by faith, lean on His presence, walk by His patience, lift by prayer, and labor by the Holy Spirit power. My face is set, my gait is fast, my goal is heaven. My road may be narrow, my way rough, my companions few, but my guide is reliable and my mission is clear. I will not be balked, compromised, detoured, lured away, turned back, deluded, or delayed. I will not flinch in the face of sacrifice or hesitate in the presence of the adversary. I will not negotiate at the table of the enemy, ponder at the pool of popularity, or meander in the maze of mediocrity. I won't give up, shut up, or let up until I've stayed up, stored up, prayed up, paid up, and preached up for the cause of Christ. I am a disciple of Jesus. I must give until I drop, preach until all know, work until He comes. And when He does come for His own, He will have no problem recognizing me. My colors will be clear. Now that is marked for Christ. Marked for Christ. This symbol was spray painted on people's homes to mark them for death. The truth is, Christ had already chiseled it on their hearts that He was theirs. May we not wait for someone to spray paint it on our houses. May our colors be true. May all those who look at us have no doubt whose we are. By spray paint, by how we live. Be marked for Christ. If you're ready to take the mark of Christ upon your soul, and you have not done so, would you join me down front? If you have been walking, but not as one sold out to Christ, rededicate your life to follow Him fully now. If it means walking down here, you're welcome to do that. If you can do it where you sit and make that recommitment to Christ, then do it where you sit. But do something. Let's stand together and sing. Would you be seated for just a moment, please? We have an awesome opportunity to live out Hebrews 13:3 this Easter. Religious persecution in most parts of the world is an everyday thing. One of our missionaries that we've supported for, over maybe 2 decades at least, Central India Christian Mission, who works in India, many of their ministers are persecuted. Some are beaten, their families are taken from their homes, some are killed. One of the things that they're doing is that they are building what they call safe homes. And what takes place there is when a minister maybe has been taken and beaten or sometimes killed and his family has no place to go, they bring them to these safe locations and give them the time they need for either the minister to recover physically and mentally, and he goes right back to preaching, or the family a place to live and regather. They've got 5 of these homes built so far, but there's more needed. The cost of one of these homes in India, furnished and all, is $17,600 for the whole thing. For most of you attended here for any time know that one of our traditions is the Easter love offering, where we pick out a project and we give towards that project. You will be getting a letter. If you didn't already get your newsletter, maybe yesterday, you probably get it tomorrow. And it has a letter in there with all of this information and envelopes to put your offering in for Easter Sunday. It is our goal this year. And it's a big goal because we've never raised this much money on an Easter love offering, to raise at least enough to build a home. To reach across the ocean. Now, let me make something clear for our new people and maybe for some of our regulars. This is not where you say, well, I usually put this in the offering plate. I'm going to put it in the offering envelope and go to that. This is above and beyond. This is an offering of love. So put your money, go above and beyond. You got 2 weeks to pray about this. Put your money above and beyond what you regularly give. Put it in those envelopes that you'll be getting in the mail, and they'll be around here too. And let's build a house. Maybe 2. At the end of the pews, there's some cards sitting there. Somebody on the end will take those and pass those down. I'm going to ask you to take one of these and think about this is for 3 reasons. One, I want you to take one and a reminder to pray for those who are in prison, those who are being persecuted. The second is this: I want you, wherever you work or where you go to school or whatever, I want you to lay it out where it's seen so that people will say, what in the world is that? And you say, let me tell you what it is. And you tell them. And you raise awareness for our brothers and sisters who are suffering. And the third is a reminder, a constant reminder for the next 2 weeks of the offering that we're going to take to live out Hebrews 13:3. I think it's a good plan. And I want you to practice something too. I don't know how we're going to pull this off. Our elders, when we take the offering, they go and they count it and do it securely and all. I'm going to ask if there's some way we can get these taken up and get them counted before the end of the service so we can announce. Their eyes are going, yeah, we might can count that fast. We're going to try. I want you to practice rejoicing that we're able to walk back in here and say we did it. Let's stand again. I'm going to ask Andy, if he would, to dismiss us with a word of prayer.